Well, good morning. My name is Tony Bynum. I'm coming to you from the beautiful state of Montana. Right now, I'm sitting in my office in Great Falls, Montana. I live here primarily. I do also live in Glacier National Park, or right on the boundary of Glacier Park, on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation as well. I'm a photographer, conservationist, and I tend to like to tell people that I really enjoy, telling stories and really studying and bringing people together in the outdoors, really around conservation issues, protection of landscapes, utilization of landscapes, and sharing in the joy of the outdoors with people. And when I talk about the outdoors, I'm not necessarily talking about skateboarding or riding a bike per se, but more human locomotion, maybe hiking, walking, and existing in mostly wild places. And by wild, I mean as extremely wild as are left in North America.
I was wondering, how did you discover photography?
That's a good question. I guess I don't really know. That I had no direction as it relates to art, really, or photography. My parents largely gave me free rein to think and do and explore however I chose, even at a young age, and supported that even when, as a parent today, I would probably not let my own children do some of the things that I did as a young person. Times have changed for sure, but nonetheless, so I don't really know. But if I look at the first time I took photos and maybe tried to explore why I was taking photos, I guess I would say my initial experience with photography was more journalistic in that I wanted to capture my friends in moments of time, and I did that as a young person a few times, and largely it didn't turn into anything important or even retrospective or introspective. It was just snapping pictures. And so I guess fast forward maybe from that time period until maybe I was in my 30s, late 20s, I started to use photography to help tell myself or help myself understand the world around me. It seems a little bit odd maybe, but it really is true that I, at the time, was living out in Washington, D.C., and I was working for the U.S. government. And I just started taking photographs of the tension that I felt in a large city, for it was the first time I'd lived in a city like that. So I had a lot of anxiety. I learned a lot, and I would recommend cities to anyone who wants to visit or spend some time there. But it turns out that my photography at the time helped me explore and maybe understand better what was happening around me. And from that point on, I really have never not taken a camera or photographed things that are interesting or that are important to me. Sometimes I do shoot things that maybe are less interesting, but that's for money mostly. People pay me to take photographs sometimes of things I really do love and sometimes not so much. But at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but I feel like I'm 180 degrees in my feelings about art and photography. On one hand, it's extremely selfish. It's really about me and about what I want to produce for myself in my heart and in my mind. And on the other extreme, I think the most rewarding aspects of photography are when, literally when people come back years later and they call me or they say, Tony, you photographed an aunt or an uncle or my father or my mother, and they were, riding a horse or hiking on a trail or, whatever the case is, and they've passed on or they're no longer around, and so they need photographs to tell the story of their families. And so for that reason, it's like really, really cool, right? Because you're actually participating in a healing event or in the future of other young people knowing who their past relations were. And on the other extreme, I am 100% aware that this is all about me and that it's filling a void somehow in my own mind.
You are a nature lover and you often go for days. hiking and hunting and taking photographs.
Mhm.
How do you plan these trips?
At the most basic level, internationally, I have done lengthy trips in many parts of the world, including some very remote places in, say, Kyrgyzstan, Turkey, um, Mexico, South America, and I prepare as a matter of just knowledge about what I need to spend time outdoors, and in largely in cold environments without support. In other words, I have sort of built my life around that lifestyle. So that part of it, my personal needs are relatively easy to meet. I pack well and I bring what I need and I understand the rules and that sort of thing. But when it comes to the larger logistics of international in particular, I leave that up to other people mostly. I do not do the big trip planning. I leave that up to the people I work for. So in other words, if I'm going to go to some place in the world, they will schedule the flights. They will do what's necessary to get the people I need together. So logistically, I'm not that well connected internationally. In the States, I try to handle everything myself. So in the United States, basically, I've traveled to every state in the U.S., every region in Canada, and I know the environments well. I know the seasons. I know the people. It's sort of, I wouldn't say it comes naturally, but really it's just about knowing where you're going to go and how long you're going to be there and spending enough time pre-planning and visualizing what it is you're going to do so that you're prepared. And at the end of the day, I end up with a pretty small checklist of things that if everything should go wrong, I can still produce the work. And so that includes how I pack, what I take with me, how I load my equipment, what goes in the airplane hold, and what goes in the seat underneath me. I'm always prepared that if I lost everything in my luggage, including my boots, I wear the boots I need on the airplanes or to go to the places because it's extremely hard to find good boots anywhere you go in the world. It's one of the hardest things to find, and they're often very expensive if you should lose them. So, I take one little camera on the carry-on and boots and all the stuff, and I feel like if things should go for the bad, I could still do the work.
How do you deal with the wildlife?
Again, that really depends on where you're at, but it really depends on what you're trying to do. You're very careful and you spend time studying these animals and spending a lot of time in the habitat in which they live, so that you're aware of how they act and react to your presence. A lot of places that we go or that I've been, wildlife are, even in hunted areas, in particular in Europe, they're a little more habituated than I expected. Some of the ibex and the chamois they're spooky, but not so much. So as long as you respect their space, it works out pretty well. In America, again, I know where these animals live. I know how to sort of act around them, and mostly they're predictable, both from a seasonal standpoint and a behavioral standpoint. From one day to the next, they're predictable. Depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you just have to be patient, I guess, and try and respect the animals and the place in which they live.
Have you ever been caught in extreme weather?
Many times. The challenges of weather are maybe one of the most motivating factors of maybe why I like doing what I do, because I do like a challenge and I like the weather. So yes, I've been caught at times on mountains where I was seriously asking myself, like, why am I here? I have children at home, and I'm going to be stuck on this mountain for days, in snow and wind and rain. And I've never gotten to the point where I thought I was nearing an end, or that I had to sort of do anything very extremely drastic, like try and get out. What I mean by get out is I've never had to like completely change my plans and into survival mode. Mostly when you're, caught in these weather situations, you're prepared for them. You have enough food to survive or to live for days. And it's really mental. It's more about trying to keep your mind motivated and focused and ignore some of the harsh conditions around you than it is anything else. It sort of goes with the territory. It's never that much fun. It's very lonely, and it's really just about, keeping your mind focused on other things. And what I like to do is just relive memories and plans for what I'm going to do when the sun comes out.
You said on your website or in one of your films that to have that perfect picture, it took thousands of hours, thousands of pictures.
Kind of goes back to what are you making a picture for and for whom? And my greatest success, if I would call it success as an artist or a photographer, has come when I've just let myself create things that I feel are right, versus forcing or pushing or trying to create something that maybe I think someone else wants to see. So when we talk about what's a good image or how much effort or energy it takes to create an image, I think it's important to put that in some context. I certainly feel like the best images I've ever made or crafted are ones that I have deliberately planned for or have prepared long enough in using my equipment and understanding weather patterns and understanding my observations and things happening around me that I'm prepared to make that photo. Sometimes these are very fleeting moments. They don't last long, especially when you're photographing people and animals. So, for example, I went on a trip to Canada one time and I was there for 10 days on one trip. And the very first afternoon, I arrived in the middle of the day, middle to the early afternoon, and created some images in the last hour of light that were some of the best I've created of those animals. And for the next 9 days, I didn't get much of anything. So again, I was prepared when the activity occurred to take the photos on the first day. But I spent the next 9 days trying to find something similar or better, and I ended up with nothing. And so all the years, where you practice your equipment, where you're trying to understand how the camera works, how it sees things, how the lens sees things, how your eyes see things, culminate maybe in the opportunity when it presents itself to actually capture a photograph that's exposed properly and sharp.
You did photographs in the glacier park, in the ranch country. Would you like to talk about this?
Photographing in Glacier Park for many years was a great passion of mine. My home, I could literally walk, out the door and into Glacier National Park in Montana, and certainly see it every day. And for many years, it was such a great place for me to go and learn and understand and just exist. I could never have probably had that experience anywhere else than living in Glacier National Park, and so it's dear to me. Today, things are a bit different. I mean, the park's beautiful, but the people are certainly more numerous these days. The ranching photography, which happens to be in a similar location, say from southern Alberta down through Montana, which is along the Rocky Mountain front on the east side of the Rocky Mountains in Montana, is one of my favorite things to do. People are passionate. They care about what they're doing. They're interesting individuals, and for the most part, they're okay with people taking photographs. But I really enjoy the challenge. I enjoy the people. I enjoy the lifestyle, and so it still to this day is essential to my yearly photography cycles. I generally do a few spring and summer photography excursions to ranch country. I have not, though, taken photographs in Glacier in a couple of years. I have chose to do other things, and mostly I'm letting Glacier Park rest. There are lots of people there, and I tend to like to go where there are fewer people. If there's a lot of people in one place, in particular in Glacier where they're photographing wildlife, that's kind of something I feel like I focus my attention other places to give the wildlife and the park more space. Today, I mean, the West is still somewhat wild. I mean, even for somebody who's grown up here, I still feel like there's enough open country and it's wild enough to go and feel free. And of course, everybody in the world recognizes cowboys from America, and they're great subjects. And there's something important about freedom and about the feeling of wide open spaces, and largely that is still the case in the West, in particular in Montana and Wyoming and southern Alberta.
The way they are represented in popular cultures, in movies, is it accurate, or are there alterations?
I would say if we're talking about mainly Western ranches, cowboys, cowgirls, that's what people see in the photographs. I can't think of a time when I've ever asked anyone to change their behavior or their apparel or their attire or do anything other than what they do. So I think that the representation that we give as a photographer, as I present to the world, is accurate. Where things get a little bit maybe complicated or misunderstood is that what we tend to do as photographers is photograph the highlights, right? It's sort of like, how interesting is sitting at your table having dinner? That's something everybody does. It's not particularly interesting, although it could make a good photograph depending on what they're eating and where they're sitting. But but people tend to want to see dramatic or stories that have interesting subjects or that tell specific stories. And so therefore, because generally people have this image of what the West is and what cowboys are, as photographers, I think we tend to focus on that. But I can honestly say that, for example, if we're looking at the life of a rancher, it's not all, cowboy hats, ropes, and horses. That's a very small part of life. And so, in fairness, what most people see is a little bit of a dramatization. But if we were to take a camera and follow a farmer and rancher around for a year, there would be a lot of, just simple pictures of people doing things like building fences and driving a pickup and, feeding a cow or fixing something. And so I think that can be interesting, but it's certainly not the kinds of photographs that get the appeal that, say, a big mountain with a cowboy on a horse on the prairie. That is just the ultimate. So we tend to focus on those things.
You are a media conservationist. What exactly means that?
One of the things that I like to do is try and help educate people about, when I say educate, I mean, I feel like part of my job is to bring different people together to look at, say, similar problems, but who have different views maybe. So media is an important aspect of that. How are stories told and by whom? For example, if we have an opportunity to bring, say, a rancher or a farmer together with more younger, maybe modern activities or maybe more current activities, both people can learn. And then sort of like, if I need to tell a story about that, where does that story need to be told? Where do we need to look towards for getting a message out? Maybe that message is about, how we're conserving water or how we're helping, the planet, or how we're, what things we're doing to help the grass grow better or to not pollute the water. And connecting that with, sometimes with businesses, here's a business that wants to, help make things better, and they happen to sell a product. And so trying to bring those stories together. And part of the job of that is to put that material, whether it's writing or whether it's photography, out into the media. Print journalism is a big one. Print magazines, media, video, all of those things combined is media. And so for me, I'm primarily focused on that area of conservation, whether it's landscape protection, conservation, hunting, outdoor lifestyle. I feel like that's kind of my area of expertise. And so, again, it's really about sort of bringing those groups together. Sometimes they're nonprofits, sometimes they're non-governmental organizations, other times they are government organizations, and producing content that tells those stories and getting it, out there. Out there meaning on the internet or in print.
I was wondering, what kind of stories are now people interested in?
I think people are still interested in the same stories we've always been interested in. People want to know about people's lives and what it takes to live and common issues and problems. And so I think the challenge these days is to try and be as honest and realistic with storytelling as you can be. And then also, how do you get it in front of people to watch? I mean, that's a big challenge, but I think if your stories are good and your imagery is good and you have the right people, it tends to find a home. But I really, that's a great question. I feel like it's no different. People are still interested in human stories and, what people are doing with their lives. And I don't think that's changed.
What are you working on right now?
Right now, I've really been exploring the connection between the Western lifestyle and open space or in freedom. And mainly because it goes back to what I kind of mentioned earlier. I'm trying to better understand the world around me through my own photography. And so there are more people moving to the West and more people moving to Montana. Our spaces are getting more full. And so I'm working on trying to understand how other people see, both how other people see Montana and our prairie and mountains and skies, and how I understand them through my own photographs. And so that's a personal project. I'm trying to look at it through, the lens of someone who comes to Montana, and what do they really see here? And I'm having a challenge with that. A lot of times what they see is what they see looking out the window of a speeding vehicle going down the highway, maybe at 70 miles an hour and 140, 130 kilometers an hour, and they look out the windows and they see everything rushing by, but they feel like they're in Montana. And so somewhere between that and actually being outside, and I know there are people that come to Montana who have told me they never want to come back here once they leave, because they feel that it's too big. There's too much space for them. They feel uncomfortable because there's nothing to hold them up.
You were born in Washington State?
Yes.
Where exactly?
In a town called Walla Walla, Washington, which is in the southeast corner of Washington State. Today it's sort of a retirement community wine town. They grow grapes now and lots of wheat. Beautiful, beautiful place.
How was the nature there?
I mean, it's the West. It's wild. The mountains are right there. You go hunting as a young person, and farming. All of it was just, I guess it's life. It's a pretty neat place. There you can be, in 10 minutes you can be up a small stream and fishing, or away from people, and yet you still live in a rural area where, largely the values are shared, which are community and strong communities and a good sense of place.
You being a hunter and a hiker, how do you juggle the two?
I think I make a decision before I leave the house or the vehicle or wherever I'm at, as to what my goals are for the day, because I don't think there's really a way for somebody like myself to turn off this focus on paying attention to what's around me. So if I'm going to go hiking, I may approach it differently in that I might stay on the trail and just be relaxed and have a nice hike. But if I were, maybe I'm photographing and I take, and all those elements are similar in that hiking and photographing and hunting all require some similar skills. The difference would be in one case you're using a camera, in another you might be using a rifle, and in one you're just hiking, but I'm still observant of what's happening around me. And so I don't find that it's a challenge. I feel like that there's a purpose and a reason for doing things, and I don't have any problems with it. I never really actually think too much about it, because I feel like I'm always thinking about what's going on around me anyhow. I'm always looking for that little critter or the wind blowing, or trying to understand, the weather, or, in particular in Montana, where I like to go, you're always on the lookout for large predators like the grizzly bear. And like it or not, you can't ever let your guard down if you're in grizzly bear country. And so at some level, being a hunter, it's natural to be out and paying attention, and whether I'm hiking or hunting or photographing, I'm aware of what's happening around me.
It's not easy being a photographer and a businessman, making photography a business as well. What's it like to do that?
It's challenging, to say the least. My journey in photography and the business side of photography was a necessity. I mean, I've been in it now as a profession, 15 plus years as a primary way of making a living. Things have changed. They've gotten a lot harder. But when I say I got into it as as a necessity. I feel like I made a decision when my daughter was born that because I was where I lived, I wasn't able to do the kinds of professional work that I had previously done. Very remote place on the Blackfeet Reservation, not a lot of opportunity there for me to be a professional scientist, and I still had a lot of passion for the outdoors and for, work, and I wanted to raise my daughter. Like, that was my main thing. I just was really focused on, I'm going to spend these days raising this child. And photography was a way for me to be present, raise my daughter, and create an income. At that time, I mean, I would drive a couple of hours, maybe every week or two, to deliver digital files. I mean, that was the beginning of digital photography. I mean, before that it was film, slides, and so once the digital aspect became real, there's still a challenge of how do you deliver a digital file from a place where there's not good internet connections or the services are poor. And so, I would drive to the next city, which is 100 miles away, where I could get an internet connection fast enough to send digital files over the internet. And I did that for a number of years. But mainly, I could be home with my daughter every day. And when I started doing more trips and being gone longer, she would stay with her mother or, her family on the reservation. But it was all about, what can I do to make a living here? And I lived in a wonderful place with beautiful setting, and I found a way to produce images that I could sell, and that fortunately made money. This was when stock photography was still, I won't say lucrative, but at least you could make a living selling stock photography. I will tell you that in those days, so this would have been, say, mid to late 2000, so 2005 to 2010, in America, you could still sell images for many, many thousands of dollars. Stock photography in a commercial setting was selling still for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 some images. That was a good start for my career. I literally, it was like, if I don't make photography work, I don't know what I'm going to do to feed my daughter. So I didn't have a choice, I feel like. So I made it work. And now, I mean, from then till now, it's just all about trying to figure out, where can I make money? My goal from the beginning was always, to make money creating images, not necessarily make money as a tour guide or as a consultant or anything else, but literally I want to create images that I can sell. Even better, create images that do sell, right? Because I have plenty of images that I have made that, I feel like should sell that haven't. But the key is really, what is it that you're going to do? And the intersection where your passion and your focus and your drive and motivation intersect a market, that's where you have to be. And so I focused really on a couple of areas of photography where there was less competition, but they were things that I was very passionate about. Rodeo, Western lifestyle, certain species of wildlife that were adjacent to me in the park, for example. And because I was there in that environment 24 hours a day as a lifestyle, and I was very passionate about it, creating the photographs were the easy part. The hard part was putting together a business model that actually worked, and doing that with the constraints of, I guess it's bittersweet, the constraints of a digital world. On one hand, I think without the digital world, I probably would have never made it. On the other hand, the digital world sort of brings the barriers down. Everybody is in a business if what you're producing is a commodity. And so again, I just tried to focus on niche areas, things that both where I was super passionate, but also had a market. And where those lines cross is where I want to spend, my time. So it's sort of like I don't always get to do everything I want because I do have to make money, but it just so happens that most of the things I love to photograph have some market.
How do you see the future of photography, especially that now we live in a world where pretty much everyone has a camera?
I believe there will always be a demand for a very specialized skill in photography or set of skills in photography. There will always be a need for a photographer to create images and get paid to do that. I do not see that going away. On the other hand, what I'm seeing more of is it's harder to make photography your only and sole income because of the things that you described, the sort of the competition. tend to not really like to call it that, but in some cases, let's talk about stock photography, where people just create images, they put them out on the internet to sell to people, right? That market has gone, as it's more of a commodity these days. You can get a picture of just about anything if you look hard enough. On the other hand, there still are niche markets, and there still are areas where you can get paid to take photographs, and you can still sell, stock photography into markets. But there is no doubt about it. It is not the same as it was. There are fewer well-paying opportunities for most people, and I think looking at the future, while I say there's always a market, there will always be demand for photographers. You have to admit that with artificial intelligence, with the computer processors we have, we're at a point right now where people can create photographs without a camera. And so that's a good thing. I think it offers opportunity. I mean, I have seen some of the best art being created these days that, when I say best, I'm talking about digital. I'm not referencing painting so much as digital art. Although it's fantastic too. But I think if you want to look at it like a business, you have to continue to evolve and find markets. And one of those areas has been motion or video. I think that's caused some real trouble for people unable to accept or modify their business to include video and motion. I've done a little bit of it. I prefer still imagery over video, but I'm capable of crafting video as well. So there's definitely a future. I just feel like it's a different path as well. I think today the path, if you want to be a photographer, I think today the path is to go to work for a corporation or a nonprofit. And do media work, do social media, do writing, do social media, and then work your way into photography as part of your job. If you go to work for sort of like a good example you would appreciate maybe is writing. If you just set out to become a great writer, it's a big world and there's lots of well-written material out there. But if you instead started writing for an audience that, let's say it's has an audience of automatically 10 or 20 million people, it's the New York Times, it's Der Spiegel, it's Vogue magazine, it's National Geographic, whatever it is. If you create that audience, then at some point in the future you can maybe move into a freelance or working for yourself. And so I like to share that with people where if they want to be in this business and they want to make it part of a business, you need to set some goals. But I would personally go through other means. Just striking out as a photographer. There occasionally are extraordinary artists discovered in our universe, in our world. It's very rare. It happens. So I wouldn't discourage anyone from exploring their artistic side. On the other hand, if you think, I'm just going to go be discovered because there's the internet, I think that's unlikely. And for the most part, if you look at the history of humankind, the most revered and well-known artists generally are not that good until they're dead. And so, unfortunately, most of them didn't make a lot of money while they were creating their art. They certainly produced a lot of material that now is worth a lot of money, but I think you need to focus, and going to work for a nonprofit or another business and then producing video and photography for them is a better track than deciding that you're just going to become a photographer.
Did you have a photographer or an artist that you looked up to as you became an artist yourself?
More recently, I have explored that concept more recently in the last couple of years. I largely ignored what was happening around me when it came to art and photography. I mean, honestly, I took art in college. I did go to college, so I took an art class in college and learned a little bit about the history of it. But I intentionally tried to not observe what other people were making, and I think that was my own way of trying to determine whether I was capable of something or not. Right? So, am I copying someone else? And so, is it really me? Is it my work? Is it something I've created, or is it just a replica of what someone else has done? And for me, that was really important. So I felt like if I was going to make a business out of it, which I wanted to do, I had to produce something that was unique. And I really found it super hard to get a foundation of unique quality when you're being maybe influenced too much by what other people are doing. Instagram is really good at that, right? You can go on Instagram and just be wowed all day by fantastic photography and then be depressed because it's like, my stuff sucks compared to all this, right? So I intentionally stayed out of that. Maybe it's because I'm not very competitive. In some ways, I'm not a competitor. I don't like contests. I don't like where people have to like enter their work and have it judged, But at the same time, that's kind of what you're doing if you want to be a professional in this business. Is you're putting your work out there, it will be judged. If it's good enough by some standards, you can find payment. That people that don't get paid doesn't mean their work's bad. It just means they probably haven't found the right niche. So, yeah, I mean, it's really complicated, I don't know, I really don't know where it's going to go from here other than I'm just going to keep producing, the work that I really enjoy to produce. And I think maybe over the last, say 2 or 3 years, I've been looking at more work by other artists and painters. And largely that's because I hear a lot of other photographers talk about that as inspiration. I never thought about it from the beginning, which is I need to be inspired. I need to look at other work. I need to learn lighting. I need to learn, it was like, I've got to create something on my own. Otherwise, I'm just probably going to end up creating what everybody else is doing. And so, and to some extent, you have to do a little bit of that anyway. But I think early on, I do have a quote, or a photographer that I was turned on to many years ago, Elliot Porter. You may have heard of him. He was a street photographer, a landscape photographer, but early on, just a fantastic crafter of images. And his basic principle was, you really just have to go out and photograph it, because some things can be photographed and some things cannot, and you won't really know until you go do it. And so that's what motivated me. I'm not as familiar with his body of work as I am with his philosophy, in the same way that, or maybe in the opposite, as somebody like Richard Avedon, who I'm familiar with his work. I love it. I think he was one of the best portrait, Western and portrait and lifestyle and sort of lifestyle later. But early on, his work was just so well done. I don't really know him. I don't know about him. I don't really know his philosophy, but his pictures were awesome. And so as I've gotten a little older, I feel more comfortable in what I've produced. I'm more, say, maybe secure in what I can produce and what I do produce, that I can explore other people's work without feeling like I'm going to be affected enough by it that I ruin my own, or that I lose the ability to be completely enchanted and completely happy with the work that I create. I think part of it goes back to being a little bit selfish in that, I really try and do photography and to help, me feel better. I hate to say it, I guess, or maybe I shouldn't, but that's the fact. When I go out and take photographs, or when I'm trying to produce something new, it's really about finding, or as I may have discovered, some hole or some void or some missing piece of myself, and I'm trying to fill it with something. And that's what happens. And so it's really hard to say, you know, who's influenced, or have you had some influences? I think for the most part, my influences have been work ethic and philosophy more than a visual influence, where I could say, well, I learned, you know, Rembrandt. I've studied Rembrandt, and so now I produce Rembrandt lighting in portraiture. Time will tell whether that's a wise decision or not. I mean, I'm the older I get, the more I feel like I probably need to go back and, you know, I'm a work in progress, so I need to go back and study the foundation. You know, I feel like I sort of built this house on a limber pine, and so it's wobbly, and I don't feel like I understand the foundation, but it's worked so far, and so I'm trying to go back and be honest about it and say, you know, I need to understand the history and the people and what's happened before me in order to be more complete.
I looked at your photography, the many angles you approached, and I felt that you would be a good military photographer.
Hmm.
Have you ever been invited to do military photography?
No, photography is not something that early on in my life I was acquainted enough with to look at, you know, what are opportunities, how can you use a camera to tell other stories, and in a particularly where you have to produce results, you know. And today I'm much more confident in that. You know, I photograph stories for the Washington Post now, and I recently came back from shooting a story for the Post, which has yet to be published, about business and about some of the strange things that happen in business around the world, and so other stories where I put in situations where either you feel like your life is being threatened, or where you feel like there is enough anxiety or tension in the people that affects the way you produce or can produce photography. It's taken a long time to get to the point where I'm comfortable in doing that, and I'm probably too old. You know, I don't know who wants a 50-year-old photographer that, you know, where they might want a 22-year-old kid. But on the other hand, you know, it takes a lot of time to build up enough confidence and enough skill sets and enough vision to produce images under any circumstance. And from that standpoint, I feel like, you know, I could do a fantastic job, but boy, it's probably not in the cards. I can tell you that one of the reasons that I have, besides COVID, that I've done less international travel is because of the tension worldwide. The times that I have actually felt that I was threatened by or potentially threatened by people around me mounted. There were more times I felt uneasy. I felt insecure. I felt like, you know, here's a guy with a gun and we're in the middle of nowhere. When I say that, I mean a military person or a police officer or a cartel or you don't know what. But when somebody comes up to you with a gun and says, like, show me your passport, it's unnerving, you know, when you're crossing roadblocks in parts of Africa or you know, as I mentioned, Turkey or Kyrgyzstan, or, you know, you're on the border of China and there are people watching you with guns. I just feel like I'm a peaceful guy, you know. I understand guns. I can shoot those guns. I know what they're about, but I'm really a peaceful guy. And so that tension that comes with particularly young people bearing arms, I think it's a commentary on my part. I think a lot of those young people don't even know what they're doing. And yet they're in these positions to try to defend some lifestyle or some place. Their clothes often don't fit. They're very young. They're carrying semi-automatic or automatic weapons. It's not my thing, you know. I've photographed some of that. I have done some commercial work with police and, you know, with military style stuff. That's okay, but as much as I agree and support our right to have guns and bear arms and that sort of thing, I'm very leery now of traveling the world when there's a lot of hostility and there are a lot of people who feel their lives are threatened and so they carry guns. And it isn't my thing. You know, I'm not into that. I'm not into having a gun pointed in my face.
Have you done or are you thinking of doing portraits?
Good. I'm glad you asked that question. So I've done a lot of portrait work. There's a lot about my photography that people don't know about because for one reason or another, I have chose to segment my business a little bit. But I've done lots of portraits. And I've done lots of portraits of lots of interesting people. And it's sort of a private aspect of my life, just as I've also done political photography. So campaigns, national U.S. campaigns, political photography. Those things are things I'm very proud of, but they're things that in a business climate it's really hard to try and it's hard to bring together all of my photographic interests and knowledge into one place on the internet and say, hire me to take your photo, right? They don't mix well. It's like, you know, if you're a wedding photographer, that probably doesn't mix well with I'm a war correspondent. If you're a portrait photographer, that is not really the genre that people are looking for if, you know, they want to do active lifestyle or travel. So it's been a big challenge for me, but I love portraits. And right now, I mean, it's probably the one area that gives me the most anxiety And it gives me anxiety for the reasons that it gives every portrait photographer anxiety. And that is, especially young ones, and that is doing justice to the craft. And what you're doing when you're shooting portraits is that you're exploring yourself, right? And so it makes you come to grips with who you are, how you see the world, all through how you produce portraits of other people. And that's risky in some ways. I don't have anything to hide, but I'm sort of afraid of getting to the point where you're actually you're intimately, in a sense, involved with a human, because you're taking their portrait, you're looking into their eyes, you're capturing their image, you're producing something you want them to be proud of, but it's really, I think, personal. So I think I'm glad you asked the question, because it's the one area I've put a lot of effort into recently. I think about it every day. I try and work on it as much as possible. I've created a new Instagram account, which I have not publicized, in anticipation of moving into a project where I'm, like most young portrait photographers or people new to it, it takes practice. You have to go out and you have to talk to people and you have to talk to them. And so what I want to do right now, I'll just tell you now, what I want to do is I want to take portraits of people with things that they have spent their life creating, right? It's sort of like journalism in a sense, but it's more related to sort of storytelling than pure journalism. So I want, for example, in the United States, in the West, there are still people alive who operated, these first generation gas stations, for example, where in 1940 they were filling up gas tanks for people on trips out to Montana or in Montana, driving their old cars. I want more than a picture of the dilapidated building or the gas station. I want a picture of the person who built it, who cared for it, and who lost it. I want to see a portrait of that person and their years and their history in and with the environment, in the environment in which they lived. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out how to do right now, is mate up or bring together architecture, old architecture, maybe a bygone era, and the person who knows about the whole story.
I also noticed that you're doing commercial photography and commercial short movies, films. They are about cars, about beer, about all kind of products. But they are very beautiful because they are stories as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the key, right? I mean, if you're trying to create images that, or if you're trying to sell a product, you have to create some reason for people to be interested in it. And visually, that's what we're supposed to do with photography. Is if what we're trying to do is help someone sell a product or a good, we have to create images that resonate with the consumer. And so I feel like I really enjoy that part of it. I think the challenge of it is all of that is to do work that is authentic and real and that you love, while at the same time you're meeting, the goals of your client. And I think that's really hard. It's really hard to find clients that can operate in the real world. I mean, no disrespect to anyone, but the difference between a company, trying to produce a product and sell it to a certain person and what's real, sometimes they're very, very far apart. I can give you an example, say, of somebody wants to, they manufacture kayaks or boats or something, and yet they really don't understand their product well enough to sell it to the people who would buy it. And so I try to put myself in a position to bring experience and knowledge about the people who will buy the product and put that together, with the product and say, all right, if you're going to actually do this, your hands have to look like this, and your paddle does this, and the boat looks like that, and the hat looks like this. And in order to do that, I think you have to be able to slow things down, and you have to be able to convince your clients that what you're doing is actually getting them to their goal. A lot of times that everything moves so quickly and everything's moving fast, and business these days is quick, and sometimes it's about taking a deep breath and being a little patient and letting something real happen, and that's largely the way I operate my photo shoot. I schedule the time. I am going to produce a product, but I recognize that it takes time. You can't just throw people out in a set on the landscape somewhere or in a studio and just start snapping away and be getting like the best stuff. It usually doesn't happen that way. So you need to schedule a little bit of time. You need to get to know people. You need to build a little bit of a team, shared visions. And I feel like I'm pretty good at doing that. It's just finding those opportunities can be a challenge. But you know what? I am lucky that I have only ever been involved in photographing or shooting video of things that I either believe in, I support, I would use. Like it's worked out really well because I'm not trying to figure out how to sell something to someone that if I don't really understand your market, then I feel like it would be hard for me to create the images that, for example, someone that does understand that market could produce. Maybe I'm limited in that, but at the same time, I'm very confident that if you came to me and said, I want to sell a backpack, or I want to sell boots or shirts or hats or even beer or cars, like let's talk about that and let's figure out a strategy, and we'll produce products, a product being visual materials that will sell that photo. And frankly, when I'm not actually being hired, I'm still selling some of my own images to help other companies fill those needs. So I anticipate what are people going to want in the outdoor world and create timeless images that I can sell to clients who don't have a budget, for example, to hire a photographer. It's not everybody that has the budget or the wherewithal to hire a photographer to photograph their product. And sometimes they buy stock photography, and I try to have something available. And one of the things, maybe this is a tip if anybody ever gets this far and listens, is I find that a lot of clients, they really want the work that they pay you to produce, but it oftentimes opens up an opportunity to sell them work that you already have or that they didn't know you had. And an example of that is when people are selling product, sometimes it's the product sells itself better if it's not the center of the image. So for example, maybe we're working on a project where what we're selling is a lifestyle product. Maybe it's a new hat or something, but the imagery of the environment in which you would wear the hat is as important as the person in it. And so all of a sudden the advertisement campaign turns into, well, we need people in the environment, but then we need some really, really beautiful images of environments. And so if I have those, because I've made them already, that's another avenue to build that relationship even better, is to say, well, I happen to have some really cool photos of rocks or mountains or streams. And, it sort of tightens up the package a little bit.
This brings us to your celebrity photography. You photographed Pearl Jam.
Yeah. That's, wow, that was pretty amazing, actually. This is a strange thing too, right? Because as I pointed out earlier, there's things that you photograph that you're not really well known for or that people don't know you've done. and this is kind of one of those things. The opportunity that I had to do that came by surprise, but also I was photographing for another client, and they introduced me to this opportunity. And so it's sort of like, am I going to pass up the chance? No. Is it something that I can take advantage of in the sense of a business advantage? Can I turn this into a market of some kind? A little bit harder because most of the photographs are embargoed or not available. But here's the interesting thing, and I think the important thing about that. For anyone who has ever considered such a thing or been in those positions, it takes experience to be in the presence of people as interesting and as worldly and as well known as Pearl Jam. I mean, because you're there and you're with them and you're talking to them, and you can't help but be a little bit shocked by who they really are. Because I had listened to they've been one of my favorite music bands, since, for 30 years, 25 years, I guess. So like, it was just amazing. I'd seen them in concert a number of times, but then to actually go back and spend time with them at a concert in their own private setting with just being regular people. I mean, so that experience, I think, even though I can't present all the images, affected the way I feel like I can handle projects like that. Everything builds, even if it's not something I can advertise widely. A photo of Eddie Vedder on my Instagram account, I would love to do all of that, right? I'd really love to spend more time with these kinds of folks. I think what it does is it helps you be more prepared in the event that you have opportunities to photograph people and places in maybe it's unexpected. For example, if I were given a chance to photograph them again, or let's say I photograph somebody else, like the President of the United States, I'm prepared emotionally and psychologically to do it. Sort of like being nervous, it's like, maybe it's not nervous, it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm really doing this. The one thing I can say that I did wrong while photographing them, I think I did it wrong anyway, is I never got a picture of myself with them, with cell phones and everything. Like, I was like, never crossed my mind. I was doing a job, I had a job to do. I was photographing the band, I was photographing individuals, and I never stopped to go, well, why don't I get a picture of me with them? And I still kick myself every time I see that. I'm like, man, I wish I had a picture of myself with Eddie Vedder. That would be really cool. So, yeah. Technology is changing rapidly all the time. I am still very much committed to, at least for now, my digital SLR cameras, and I'm a Nikon and a Fuji person, so I shoot Nikon cameras and I shoot Fuji cameras. Lens-wise, it is literally whatever the job demands. One of the things I pride myself in is being prepared. So if client needs a certain job shot, I'm prepared to shoot that job and 20 or 50 degrees on either side of it. I'm going to be ready with the equipment that I need to capture more than they probably thought they would ever need. Am I comfortable? I'm comfortable with anything from, like, literally at home with 500 millimeters down to 12. And I think for any photographer, understanding what those lenses can do and what they cannot do is extremely important. And there is a criticism that can be made about the technology, in that it creates the opportunity to be, I think, a little less careful about what you're doing. So it's always interesting to see a new perspective, and technology through lenses can do that, right? You can put a super wide angle lens on a camera, get really close to something and present a perspective that most people haven't seen. It's kind of a gimmick in a way, but it's also real in that if used properly and in the right context, it can actually tell the story in a way that maybe another lens can't. And so there is value, obviously, in having all of this equipment, but you have to know when to use it and when not to use it. Video is the same way. You know, how much slow motion do you really need? How much is too much? And you know, how many angles do you need to tell a story? 3? You know, it'd be nice to have 7, but you get 3, you can tell a story. You get 2, you can tell a story. You can tell a story with 1, but I can do a better job if I understand and have access to the equipment. So I'm just as comfortable with a 50 millimeter lens as I am with an 85 or with a 120 or with a 200. It all just depends on the story that I want to tell, and how do you plan to tell that story. And I feel like I'm pretty much prepared to tell whatever story needs to be told, no matter where I go.
Behind you, you have 2 maps. Are you planning any itineraries these days?
I'm a visual person and I love maps. These are maps of Montana, and I'm always paying attention to the places, in particular in Montana, especially with COVID. I've stayed in the States and probably see that happening more in the future, more local and less international. But these maps help me understand places that I'm going better. And if you can understand the physical geography of a place, it helps you understand the people better. One of the maps is a newer one, and the other is a much older one. And so understanding the history of a place, it also helps you to create and build relationships with people who live in those places. Maybe nothing specific, but I have these maps because I am always trying to learn more about the places where I live, and Montana is a huge place. It takes maybe 10 hours or more, 12 hours to drive across from one side to the other. So it's really a big place, and there's lots going on. And I think for me, I just really have a need to learn landscapes better all the time.
How can people find you, and do you take international commission?
If someone understood how to spell my name, TonyBynum, Tony Bynum, and they type that into Google, all you'd have to do is click the image, and certainly hundreds of photos will come up. But TonyBynum.com, and social media is probably the best place and quickest through Instagram. My Instagram address is at Hunt Photos, HUNT Photos. I'm on Twitter a lot because it's where I get a lot of instant breaking news. I really like Twitter for that. And for all media, Twitter is really a good tool. I'm at Tony Bynum on Twitter. And I will pretty much get back to anybody who contacts me. I mean, obviously I get a lot of spam. If something gets lost, I apologize, but I will get back to anyone. And yes, I mean, I have international clients. I always learn when I have international clients because they do things, different countries, different people, different places, they do things differently. And from a financial standpoint, it can be challenging, but I always learn, and that's really important to me. I was working with a Swedish magazine here last week, I think, and I've worked with French and German, South American, New Zealand clients in New Zealand. So, well, I'm familiar with it and would love to do more travel. But it's a balance of, what are we doing? Where are we doing it? And I'm more and more trying to focus on peace. peace in the world, peace generally, because I think we need more peace. I really believe people should have places to share their art, and I think we should be free to do that. And I feel like whether it's a painting or whether it's drawing or photography or mixed media or metal, I feel like it's extremely valuable that people participate and they are exposed to it and they are safe, and we provide opportunities for that. Pianos, music, guitars, like anybody who's passionate about art should be able to practice art. And I'm afraid that at least in America, we're not doing as much of that anymore. And I don't know what that means for the future, but it can't be good. We do take a lot of pictures, but I feel like our schools are not doing quite as well with the art as they once did. I know you interviewed a woman recently from Montana, fantastic artist, and lives very near me. I was excited to see that, but art's super important. I think people should just try and focus on doing things that make them feel better about themselves and about the world and about everything. Like, do more of it. and because things get really complicated really fast, and as you get older, there's less time to be introspective and probably less time to do art than as a young person.